Hey readers, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing fine myself. Today I'm going to be looking back at the month of July 2022 and I'm going to discuss all the books that I finished reading last month, and also I'm going to point you in the direction of all the different reviews that I made of all those books last month. I had a great month in July. I read a lot of amazing books. And it was also a pretty good month for my channel, Juan Reads, because I got a lot of new subscribers. So I would like to welcome you if you're a new subscriber. If you've only recently discovered my channel, I hope that you enjoy my content. And also, of course, thanks to everyone who has been watching my channel for quite some time. But let's start with the books that I finished reading last month. And the first one was a novel entitled Things Fall Apart by the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe. I am almost ashamed that I haven't read nowhere near enough African literature, particularly sub-Saharan literature. Not that I've read a lot of North African literature either, but I'm particularly ashamed about not having read enough sub-Saharan literature, and that's something that I would like to change. So I decided to go for the most obvious choice, which is Things Fall Apart, which is a novel from the 1950s that deals with colonization. So in that novel, what we have is we see what society was like in Nigeria, in a very specific place, in a very specific area of Nigeria, before European, in this case, British colonization. And then we see the arrival of the colonizers and the impact that has on society. But we don't get a macro view here. We go in on the life of a very narrow set of characters, mostly the protagonist, who struggles with his masculinity and also his values. You know, his masculinity, I guess, is framed by the whole societal values. So this protagonist is a man, and he occupies a very important place in his society. He's respected and he's feared. What impact is British colonization going to have on that? Well, it will have an effect. And I loved how this novel dealt with that in a very almost naive, almost you could misread it as simplistic. I think what it is that the novel speaks to an oral tradition. So for Western readers or readers with sophisticated tastes, and I put sophisticated tastes with a lot of quotation marks, this novel may seem simplistic, but it is, I think, because it speaks to a pre-written and oral literary tradition that I think Chinua Achebe wanted to highlight and wanted to introduce into a Western form like the novel, and I think he succeeded. So I really recommend the book, and I recommend the video. And by the way, all the books that I'm going to mention in this video are going to be linked to in the show notes or description box, and also all the video reviews. So if you haven't watched my video review of Things Fall Apart, now all you need to do is go to the show notes and you'll find a link to it, and this will apply to every other book that I'm going to discuss in this video. Okay, so July was our second month doing the Reading the Bible as Literature project or challenge that we are doing. So we read the second book of the Bible, Exodus. So I discussed that book. That's a story of Moses. It is fascinating. If you want to read a story about a hero, if you like heroic narratives, but want to read a heroic narrative that is very different to, I would say, classical heroic narratives like the Iliad or the Odyssey, or anything more contemporary like comic book heroes. If you want to read something very different and see the story of this Hebrew hero, I really recommend you watch my video, whether you have read Exodus or not, because if you watch my discussion of it, you might decide to then read the book, and it might work better that way. Or you might want to read Exodus and then watch the video. It's up to you. But that's also there available. Remember that I'm not doing a religious reading of the Bible. I'm not interested in that. Personally, I'm just reading the Bible like I would read anything else from literature. So my approach to reading the Bible, in this case the book of Exodus, is exactly my approach to reading, for example, the Iliad, which is a book that I'm rereading at the moment, and hopefully I'll talk about it at some point in the future, okay? Does that mean that I don't want to hear from religious people? Absolutely not. I mean, if you're a Christian of any denomination, if you're Jewish, if you're a Muslim, or any other religion other than those three, you are welcome to comment and to give your opinion. Even if your point of view is religious and not strictly literary, you can. Also, it is likely that people who watch my Bible series, and in specific this book of Exodus video, will know a lot more than I do. And that's okay, because I'm not trying to be an expert. I'm just someone who, from a non-religious perspective, is reading the Bible, a lot of it for the very first time. So I come with a lot of preconceived notions of it. I come from big movie epics from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. I come with religious ideas that I have heard about growing up and so on, and I'm just trying to read it as a book and trying to understand it as a book. But if you want to talk about the religious significance of any of the passages or anything like that, or if you want to talk about it as literature, please comment. Don't worry. It's okay to say, you know, you got this wrong, this actually means this, or according to such and such, it means something else. You're more than welcome to watch these videos and comment. But let's move on to something completely different, because you might not be interested in the Bible. So the next thing is definitely completely unrelated to the Bible, or is it? So I'm talking about In Search of Lost Time. So I finally, in July, finished reading all the 7 volumes of In Search of Lost Time. I own this huge omnibus edition by Carto Gallimard in the original French. I recommend you buy it if you want to have it, because it is a thing of beauty, but I don't recommend you read it. Even if you can read in French, I don't recommend you read it from this volume, because it's too much, it's too big, it's too heavy, it's really, really heavy. The way I did it, I read 1 volume at the time, and I read them in ebook format. I love ebook formats. They make my life so easy, ebooks. What can I say about In Search of Lost Time? I tried to say everything I had to say in that video, and I'm very proud that I managed to make a video discussion of the whole thing, In Search of Lost Time, and my video lasted under 14 minutes. You'll find a lot of information of In Search of Lost Time on YouTube and elsewhere, but sometimes you have to read a lot or watch really long videos. If you just want an introduction, if you want to see why you might want to read In Search of Lost Time, if you want to kind of get a sense of what it is about, to see if you might like it or not, if you want to get a sense of how it is written, if you want to kind of get tips on how to choose the best translation, all of that information I tried to put into that video. A lot of people have watched it, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of my subscribers haven't watched that video, so I really recommend it. I'm very proud of it. I'm also very proud of my Shakespeare series that I started in June, so July was also the second month in which I did that, and I reviewed Othello by William Shakespeare. Now, I didn't like Othello, and I talked about why I didn't like Othello on that video, and I feel like in a lot of my reviews, I talk about how much I love books, and I think that's right. That's what I like to do. That's what feels good to me, and often I do read great books that I love. But Othello is different, because I'm reading Shakespeare. I'm reading the whole thing, all his plays. Inevitably, I'm going to stumble on plays that I don't like, or that they don't speak to me, or that I don't respond to in the same way that I respond to others. And Othello was the first one. I would say out of all the Shakespeare plays I've read so far, not just the ones that I've discussed on this channel, but the ones that I've read as a student and, you know, when I was younger, etc., Othello is my least favorite. In fact, I think I pretty much hate it. I was also a bit conflicted about the next book I finished last month, which is one of those huge Victorian novels that I felt like I should have read a long time ago. I had been meaning to read for many, many years, and I watched lots of movie and TV series adaptations, but I never really got to the book, so I'm trying to get to those books gradually. And so last month I decided to tackle Vanity Fair, which is really big, and I was surprised that I devoured it. I read it in, I think, under a week. It is a very messy book, man. It's so messy. In Victorian times, a lot of novels came in weekly or monthly installments over usually 6 months or a year, and you can tell that William Thackeray, the author of Vanity Fair, got bored with some of his characters. You have Becky Sharp at the beginning, and you think she's going to be the protagonist of that novel, and in fact, A lot of the movie and TV adaptations, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, tend to focus on her and her narrative, and you do get that in the book. It's not like those adaptations make things up. All of that is there, but there's also a lot more. There's a lot about the Napoleonic Wars. Even though this book is from later in the 19th century, the society that it portrays, and you should know before you read Vanity Fair that it is a social satire, so it satirizes, it makes fun of English society, upper class, middle class, upper class English society, but not the English society of Thackeray's time, but the generation before. So if you have read and enjoyed novels by Jane Austen, for example, that's the society that William Thackeray is making fun of course with hindsight, because he's writing from a few decades into the future. I love that aspect of it. It's so much fun to read this novel. It can be a bit frustrating because it's very sprawling, but I think it is definitely a must read if you like English literature, if you like satire, if you like those Regency novels by Jane Austen, for example, if you like Victorian novels. So I think Vanity Fair would appeal to a wide audience. And also, as I was reading it, I wondered why we don't have more novels like Vanity Fair now. Why don't we have more social satires? We do, I know we do, and you can leave in the comments, your recommendations for current or recent social satires about America, about Britain, about France, about any country, about China, I don't care. But I would really love to read something with the scope and the breadth of Vanity Fair, perhaps something a little bit more narrowly focused, something with a more coherent structure, because novels are not written in installments anymore. But I would love to read that about now, or about the 90s, or about, the early 2000s with the war in Iraq and all that kind of thing. But something with a bit of hindsight, I think, would be good. My review of Vanity Fair, check it out if you haven't. And then I also read 3 really good Latin American novels. I read 2 novels by Manuel Puig. I read his first novel, The Betrayal of Rita Hayworth, and his last novel, Tropical Night Falls. The Betrayal of Rita Hayworth is a first novel, meaning that it is hugely autobiographical. It's about life in a small town in Argentina in the 1940s, where American movies were very important. They were basically the only entertainment. But the book is not really about movies, and it's not really about Rita Hayworth, although she features in the novel as a very important cultural reference to some of the characters. This novel is polyphonic, so there are many different voices from the inhabitants of this town. A lot of them are women, some of them are men, some of them are quite old, some of them are quite young. It is fascinating. It is such an achievement for a first novel. It was very enjoyable, a lot of fun. And if you enjoy it, I think you will enjoy later novels by Manuel Puig. Manuel Puig is, of course, famous because he wrote The Kiss of Spider-Woman, which is an amazing novel. It is a great novel that I would like to reread at some point soon-ish. That novel, of course, was adapted into a Broadway musical and a play, and also a big Hollywood movie. So you might have heard of it, even if you haven't read the novel. I really recommend that novel, by the way. So a lot of the elements that you find in A Kiss of the Spider-Woman are already there in his first novel. But the one that I really love is his last novel, Tropical Night Falls. This is about 2 women in their 80s, right? And they are from Argentina, but they live in Rio de Janeiro. And much of the novel, not the whole novel by any means, but a lot of the novel, definitely the first few sections of the novels, are basically conversations between the 2. And they gossip a lot, and they talk a lot about their lives, and you're not sure why they are in Rio, why they're not in Argentina. They have different backgrounds. Everything, it gradually makes sense, and it's a lot of fun from page 1. I devoured that book. It was so compelling, I couldn't stop reading it. I read it in one day. I actually couldn't go to bed that night until I finished it, and I don't remember feeling like that about any book I've read in a long time. So it was definitely, I would say it is one of my favorite novels that I've read this year, and I'm already looking forward to reading it again. Now, the third Latin American novel that I read in July was Budapest by the Brazilian writer Chico Buarque. Again, the novels by Manuel Puig were originally published in Spanish. If you read Spanish, I would recommend you read them in Spanish, but they're also available in English and other languages in translation. And Budapest by Chico Buarque is also available in English translation and also in other languages. I read the novels in Spanish and Portuguese respectively. Now, Budapest is about this Brazilian ghostwriter from Rio de Janeiro who falls in love with the Hungarian language. This novel was fascinating. It marries two worlds that, at least in my mind, don't really belong together. They are Central or Eastern Europe, Hungary, I would say that's Central Europe, and the tropics, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I love what the author Buarque does. Of course, Chico Buarque is very famous as a singer-songwriter, so I'm sure the name rings a bell even if you haven't read. He's also a really good writer. This is my first novel by him, but I think I'll definitely read more novels by him. I also will read Budapest again because I feel like a lot of it went over my head. I think I probably read it too quickly, and it is a novel that I think it's open to interpretation, and you really need to spend your time with it, which I would recommend. So I talked about those 3 novels in a video entitled 3 Book Recommendations from Latin America, which came out the week before last. And I recommend that. If you want to get some book recommendations, watch that video because I don't spoil anything and I just talk about these 3 books that I think I'm convinced that a lot of people who watch my channel will enjoy or would enjoy. Another book that I read was Light in August, and this is a book that I struggled with, and I even made a video about struggling with the book, and then I made a video reviewing the actual novel. Light in August, I would say, is probably one of the most accessible novels by Faulkner that I have read. Previously, I have reviewed As I Lay Dying and The Sound and the Fury, which I think are superior novels, but they're also a lot harder. So if you want something accessible, if you've never read Faulkner, I would say go for Light in August. But if you want to go for a better Faulkner, then go for As I Lay Dying or The Sound and the Fury. I would particularly recommend The Sound and the Fury. Light in August didn't quite speak to me. I usually don't respond that well to William Faulkner novels, but that hasn't stopped me from reading them, and it will not stop me from reading more of the novels and also rereading them. I've reread As I Lay Dying and The Sound and the Fury, but Light in August I've only read once, so I made that review upon my first and so far only read of that novel. And I have opinions, and in that video I talk about why I struggle with it and also why I think the novel is still worth reading and why I'm happy I read it. So what's the novel about? It's about different characters who struggle a lot because they're in the fringes of a very strict Southern society. The book is set in the 1930s, so we have Jim Crow and we have Prohibition. And it's important you understand that when you read the novel, that you understand that background. Otherwise, the novel is not going to make much sense to you, and it's also going to be a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit out of date, which is how I felt. Even knowing what the novel is about and the context, I still struggle connecting with it. There's a lot about racism because one of the main characters is either a white man or a man who passes as white, a black man who passes as white. And the important thing is that he's convinced he's mixed-raced, and a lot of people are convinced that he's mixed-raced, black and white, which in that kind of culture and society would make him black, in effect, even though he looks white and he was raised by white people, but still, I thought that was very interesting. And I think the character, his name is Joe Christmas, very memorable name. I think it's a very complex character, and just reading his story just makes it worthwhile. The novel doesn't begin with him. The novel begins with another character that we also follow throughout the narrative. This white woman, this time a white woman, who is pregnant, and she's looking for the man who got her pregnant because he doesn't know that she's pregnant. And so she's convinced that she can find him and they will get married. That's one of the things that propels the novel forward, is just following her and seeing what happens. But the novel is a lot more than that. And I managed to discuss it in just 9 minutes. So I recommend you check out that review. But please let me know if you've read any of these books or if you want to read them. And also, what did you read in July? I would love to discuss that in the comment section below. And I hope that I will see you again very soon on my next video. Take care.